Everyone's favourite Catholic thinker is back with yet more dishonesty about atheism. Brian Holdsworth is proof that you can sound like a genius but not have a bloody clue about what you're talking about. And since he's chopped off his long locks, he may well be like Samson of the Bible and lost his magic powers of sounding convincing when it comes to the existence of gods. Atheism makes you dumb, apparently, and he's going to explain why. Hello, I'm the Skeptic, the British floating circle that watches people make extraordinary claims and then I explain why I don't accept what they're saying. If ever there was a man that at least sounded like he had all the answers, it's Brian Holdsworth. This smooth-talking, handsome bugger has high production quality and a voice like silk. If only that was the case for me. But having those things doesn't make you correct all of a sudden. B-Man has made tons of videos about gods and popes and why atheism can't be true, and this video is no exception. Reason gets destroyed by atheism. All right, Bri, let's see why. However, before we see reason getting obliterated by atheism, if this isn't your first Skeptic video, hit the like, the subscribe and the bell and maybe we can obliterate the algorithm. And a super thanks to those that hit super thanks in some recent videos. Dr. Osiris and Andy Martin. And a big thank you to channel members who get access to Lisa the Rainbow Giraffe and more hen emojis. Lisa the Rainbow Giraffe bestows leaves upon you all. More hen. Right, we better start off with finding exactly what Brian means by atheist.
Okay, so before I begin, I have to qualify the form of atheism I'm going to be talking about in this video.
There's only one kind of atheism. Not believing in gods, not being convinced of their existence. That's literally it, Brian. Off to a good start, huh?
And why I'm focusing my attention on it. Because every time I do a video about atheism, I inevitably get multiple video replies from atheist channels accusing me of lumping atheism into one subset or just attacking a straw man.
No one would be dumb enough to reply to the great Brian Holdsworth and point out why what he says is a bit silly, would they?
Obviously, not all atheists are the same or believe the same things.
But they're atheists because they don't believe in a god, right?
But this kind of atheism I want to examine today was adhered to and promoted by some of the most prominent atheists in history.
Prominent atheists in history? Historical people who were famous because they didn't believe in a god? You're talking about Creaky, aren't you?
And the comments I most often see from atheists on my channel are assuming the truth of this system of thought, which is naturalism.
Well, the main problem is that you godders use your god to explain so much because of laziness or something, and when someone like me says, I don't believe in gods, someone like you says, yeah, well, how do you explain X without my sky fairy? And so, because it's fun or interesting or something, I would then explore X and see what the scientific consensus is, and use that as my go-to since there's no reason to accept anything other than natural explanations. Unless, of course, I'm being lazy and then I just say, Lisa the Rainbow Giraffe leave me upon her poop decks into existence.
Naturalism is the belief that only the natural world exists and that all phenomena can be explained from within it. There is no supernature or the supernatural or dimensions of reality outside the natural world. And if we hope to inquire about reality, the physical sciences, which focus their field of inquiry on the natural world, is all that we need. And since only the natural world exists, we have no need of a god who exists outside the natural world because there is no outside the natural world.
And what's the problem with pointing to that which is demonstrable, instead of making up magic explanations or just saying, I don't know?
And when I've addressed this belief as a form of atheism in the past, I had multiple comments and video replies claiming that this version of atheism is utterly foreign to them and that I'm erecting a straw man to make my job easier. Which I have to admit I was a little dumbfounded by, because this view was held and promoted by a whole cast of extremely prominent and influential thinkers such as David Hume, Karl Marx, whose theories about history, politics, and human nature are astonishingly resilient and influential in spite of the tens of millions of dead people who were victims of those ideas. Bertrand Russell, who should need no introduction, John Dewey, who basically revolutionized education as we know it, and virtually all of the new atheists such as Dawkins, Dennett, and Harris. As far as I can understand them, they all appear to be naturalists.
Instead of assuming, why don't you just ask those that are alive? It would be like me saying that a Christian or Catholic in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina holds the same belief as you, so I'm going to use them as a benchmark for you. It sounds like you're straw manning again, trying to get some weird definition of atheism to prove your point.
So Please don't reply that this is an uncommon form of atheism. It is arguably the most common, which is why I primarily focus my attention on it.
No, you're talking about naturalism, not atheism, so maybe this is just clickbait.
But I've also heard several replies that have claimed that atheism isn't a belief or a worldview or a system of thought at all. It's just withholding of belief in God or gods until sufficient evidence can be offered, which... okay, if that's how you define your atheism, then well and good. But that's not how atheism has historically been defined. And the cast of characters I just named, like Russell and Dewey and Marx and Hume, they wouldn't agree with that definition.
How do you know? Have you asked them? Are you straw manning again?
And I simply... forgive me for saying this, I just don't believe people who have entire YouTube channels dedicated to explaining their thinking as mere withheld beliefs.
Right, it's also about pointing out why your beliefs are silly.
I've withheld my beliefs on a whole range of subjects like Bigfoot or UFOs, which is why I don't spend any time talking about them.
Right again. But if Bigfoot belief was being forced upon people, or not believing in aliens meant having your door knocked on once a week and being asked if you'd like an anal probe from a Clefnon, then I'm sure there'd be plenty of videos about why believing in that stuff is silly. Though I do subscribe to there being other life out there, just maybe not visiting our planet.
The things that I don't believe in aren't of interest to me.
And maybe they would be if people threatened you with eternal torture for not accepting Bigfoot.
I don't write books about them, and I don't erect YouTube channels to debunk them or the people who believe in them. I also don't identify myself with a term like a Bigfooter. But considering people do call themselves atheists, they write books about their atheism and publish YouTube channels and blogs all about their atheism, seems to me that withheld beliefs is the last thing you could describe them as.
Again, if religious belief wasn't so prevalent and didn't dominate society like it does, then I'm sure there wouldn't be. I'd love nothing more than for religious belief to die away and for me to not have to point out why belief in gods is silly. That way I could focus on my Warhammer channel, which isn't a thing. But alas, here we are, you say something silly and I point it out.
And they might say the only reason they're putting so much effort into describing their beliefs is as a defensive response because Christians are always trying to force their beliefs on others.
Well, yeah, I kind of did say that.
To which I would say, well, now who's building straw men? Because forcing people to believe in Christianity isn't something that goes on anywhere in the world today. And if you could find instances of it, it would be the rarest of exceptions.
Wake up and smell the haircut, Brian. Do you just not leave the house? They're trying to pass bills to have the 10 Commandments put in schools. My stepkid was told to take a Bible as a gift at the end of the school year, even though it's a state-funded school. That happens all over, apparently. So now you just make up lies too.
It's also quite offensive to make this accusation. There are multiple genocides taking place right now as I'm making this video against Christian populations in places like Syria and Nigeria. But there are no Christian populations murdering Muslims or Buddhists or Hindus in order to eradicate them or force them to convert.
Just because it's being done without killing doesn't mean it's not happening.
But even if Bigfoot believers were somehow forcing everyone to conform to their beliefs, as someone who is agnostic on that question, that is, someone who has withheld his beliefs on the subject, I would simply push back by arguing nobody should be forced to believe something they don't think is true or that hasn't been proven to them.
Right! And when they continue and say that society is better with Bigfoot belief and that some of your rights have to be taken away because you don't believe in Bigfoot, then you have to speak up.
I wouldn't be claiming that they don't exist unless I had compelling positive arguments to make such a claim.
I see no reason to accept what you're telling me exists, so please stop telling me how to live my life or that I don't understand reason.
So I'm sorry if I simply don't find that convincing, and I don't think neutral observers should either. Atheism is the positive claim that there is no such thing as God, and naturalism is the claim that all reality is contained within the natural physical world, and that nothing outside of it, such as supernature or God, exists whatsoever.
Are you drinking a milkshake? Do you need a straw, man?
And if that were true, then I intend to argue that reason would have to be denied along with it. And I suspect that not too many atheists would be eager to make that concession because reason seems to be the cause they identify with the most in their community or movement or tradition or whatever you want to call it. Sam Harris wrote a book called The End of Faith with the subtext that said The Future of Reason. Richard Dawkins lent his name to The Foundation for Reason in Science. And Bertrand Russell once famously said, as soon as we abandon our reason and are content to rely on authority, there is no end to our troubles. But reason simply can't exist in a naturalist world. If naturalism is true, then reason, like God and religion, is mere illusion, which should be treated with just as much suspicion and perhaps contempt as all of these atheists treat the question of God.
So now you don't understand what reason is either. It isn't going well for you, Brian.
And to explain why I make this claim, we have to take a second to describe what reason is. So reason is our ability to examine the world around us and to infer what is true about it.
Hold on. You use reason to conclude a God exists then, which is impossible when you use faith.
And such inferences often come from things unknown. The answer to a riddle or a problem is only arrived at through reasoning, and we see this all the time in something like algebra. We might say that we don't know what the value of x is, but we do know that y equals 1 and that x equals y. Therefore, our reason is able to uncover the solution, which is that x equals 1.
Yeah, but you're given extra information there which demonstrates the answer. That doesn't happen with God, so that was a terrible analogy.
And notice what we're doing when we use our reason. We are moving into the abstract of our minds, the abstract being non-physical reality. Our minds allow us to step outside the reality we are considering and then examine it, weigh it in the balance, and determine based on that deliberation what is true about it.
Or what is most likely, and then find other ways to support that answer. All things which have been tried with gods but have failed, because the reasons aren't convincing.
It's as though we are sitting above the facts we are considering and organizing them in a pattern we call reasoning, which then tells us something about the real world that we are considering. But if naturalism is true, then that means that everything and every event can be explained by natural causes. Like you and I are explained by the cause of our parents, and they by their parents, and all the way back until you reach the cause of the human species.
It's not really a cause of the human species, though. It's a blending of time and change.
Which is itself caused by some biological ancestor, which is then caused by biological existence or life itself, and so on and so on. The Earth was presumably caused by some celestial collision of matter, energy, and forces like gravity. My indigestion is caused by the thing that I ate that I shouldn't have. And the natural sciences are the mechanism we have for examining this vast sequence of cause and effect, which explains, in theory, everything that can be explained.
Or offers the best understanding for now, until new information comes up. Sounds extremely reasonable so far.
But here's where the naturalist runs into a big problem, because the psychological processes in our minds are also natural events, which means that they must have a natural cause if naturalism is true.
Why do believers need to make it a cause? Can't they just accept explanation? Cause has too much weight. Explanation makes way more sense to me.
They must be inevitable events forced to occur by that long chain of events in the sequence of cause and effect. But the kind of reasoning we described earlier is not inevitably caused. It's something that steps outside of the variables and examines them and draws conclusions about them. It appears to sit above and independently from all these natural events. But if it's just one of the natural events in question, then it can't be claimed that it was arrived at through whatever it is that we mean by reason.
It sounds like you don't like that it can be arrived at by what you personally define as reason. Playing word games might have worked when you had long, luscious locks, Holdy, but now you've got boring old short hair, so you have no power here.
And we all intuitively seem to know this, because something people do all the time to discredit the opinions of others as irrational is by accusing them of being caused by something other than reason. Actually, Richard Dawkins does this all the time. He says that Christians only believe in Christianity because they were raised in a Christian society. If they had been raised in a Hindu or a Buddhist culture, they would have been Hindu or Buddhist. He's taking for granted that because he can explain the cause of a belief as having its origin in something other than the process we call reasoning, then it is not a reasonable belief.
So then, to you, it's reasonable for those folks to have beliefs in those gods. But that then would cause issues in which God or gods were the most reasonable and would make it unreasonable for some to accept that their belief is reasonable, which would make theism unreasonable, since it can be wrong.
If we can say something like, you only believe that I don't know, Canada is going to win the hockey game because you're Canadian, or you only think there's a ghost in the next room because you ingested psychedelic mushrooms. If your thoughts are caused by something else, like patriotism or mind-altering drugs, then they aren't based on some independent process we call reason.
And if your parents taught you that your God is real because their parents taught them, then there's no reason.
And if naturalism is true, then all beliefs are actually caused in this way, which would then invalidate reason itself. Far from being free from the impositions of natural causes, it turns out to be subject to and under the dictates of all irrational causes. And if all that is going on in my mind is just a sequence of inevitable effects by irrational causes, why should I trust any of the conclusions of my mind as having something valid to say about the world or about truth?
You know what, Bri? I agree with you. Why should I accept anything you say to be reasonable? Good point.
In fact, if what we call reasoning is actually just the caused events in our psychological systems, then whatever we might say about reality is actually just statements about the events in our minds.
No, it isn't. Having an explanation for how brains work doesn't change what is and isn't happening. Explanations for understanding doesn't then alter events. It just explains how and why we can understand them.
Which really have nothing to do with external reality. Our so-called reasoning about the outside world turns out to simply be utterings about events going on inside of ourselves. And what we call reason is actually just an elaborate trick of those events, which convinces us that we have some freedom in arriving at well thought out conclusions.
Sure, there's things happening in a natural way, but you don't understand it, so it must be magic. However, you think that everything got here because of a magic man in the sky performing some magic, and here we are. Where's the reason there, Brian?
At the end of the day, abstract reasoning aims at truth, while natural events only produce physical outcomes.
So it's demonstrable? And you have a problem with that? I think you're the problem here.
If our thoughts are just the result of blind physical causes, there's no reason to trust them as reliable guides to truth.
Exactly. Well done, Brian. We shouldn't just accept things we can make up. We should back up ideas with things you can repeat and test. It's like you actually understand things, but then dismiss them because you love God.
Which undermines naturalism itself. That is, unless it's not a trick, and our minds and our faculties of reason actually are independent from the natural system of cause and effect, and cannot be explained as all other events are in this way, which means that in the case of the human being, there is something like a window or a door that opens to the outside of determined natural events.
Lovely story, Brian. But if you think there's an explanation for your brain concluding things outside of what is demonstrably natural, then you'd have a burden of proof to go with that. And then we don't get anywhere because we're just waiting for you to prove stuff whilst you sit there saying atheism is unreasonable.
And when we employ our reason, we are walking through that door for a period of contemplation before we return with a conclusion about the world and reality that we just examined, as if we and everything about it aren't fatally determined by it.
What? That's the end? So you just complained about atheism definitions, why reason doesn't work for you, and how you can't comprehend life without a cause? Well, there wasn't anything about why atheism destroys reason. Sorry, Brian, maybe getting your haircut was a mistake. I actually, maybe not really, considered what you had to say when you had long locks. Well, sorry, Bri. You've really lost your skills. You just seem to straw man a lot and get atheism completely wrong. So this is less a destruction of reason by atheists and more theism doing reason a disservice. However, you may disagree and think that Brian here had some good points, and atheism is really the end of reason. Let me know in the section below. I'm going to skeptic this as reason being safe for now. A big thank you to this month's top level ticks on Patreon. Dark Ether Piao, Tamo, The Barely Bearable Atheist, George, Godless Granny, Addy Rockhart, The Enixes, Jakari, Elizabeth, Whiskey Tech Fred, Rick and Stylistic Matthew, as well as all the $3 base ticks and channel members. You can become a supporter on Patreon too at patreon.com/theskeptic. The link is in the description, along with links to all my other socials. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. From me, The Skeptic, stay safe, keep thinking logically and ask questions. Skepticism is the first step towards truth. See you next Saturday.